Okay, everybody. Hi, thank you very much for attending today's Volunteer Ambassadors Zoom meeting. The aim of today is basically to try and highlight what centre users who are also volunteers do for us in terms of promoting the work that we do, but also helping us to raise awareness of sensory loss. And all of you here, who are here today have done that in different ways. So we're just going to have a nice relaxed chat about that, if that's okay. So I'm going to ask you a few questions, and the first question I'm going to ask is, and I'm going to ask Lawson this, so what kind of groups have you met in your volunteer role as an ambassador for the centre?
Well, starting with the youngest, I've been out to school nurseries, schools, brownies, guides, beavers, scouts, probus clubs, rotary clubs, ladies groups, pretty much any of those and all parts in between.
Brilliant, yes. And that is such a variety of different groups, which, you know, is fantastic. You know, and sometimes you have to kind of pitch it differently, you know, so you have to kind of think about your audience. So if I can ask John, for example, you've gone out to schools quite a bit. How do you work with the schools?
I've done a lot that Lawson has done as well. To Cubs and Scouts, and I've been out with Martin a few times at schools as well. And I've the Rotary Club, right? But I haven't been beyond that till, you know, other groups. But I also do the tours for the student nurses from Stirling on a regular basis as well, because they come to get some information. But much the same really as Lawson. I think I've also done 3 or 4 of the pensioners, the elderly people sessions that they have sometimes in the town hall and that. So I've represented the sensory centre there.
That's right, in events that we've gone out where we've been promoting the centre.
Yeah.
So when you go into the schools, John, what kind of thing do you do with them? You were talking to me recently about that.
I find children they're like blotting paper for learning, that and they're always very eager, and they're a much better audience than any adults you can get in the world. Children are fantastic. And I usually introduce myself by saying hello, you know, my name is John and things like that, then ask them what their name is, and then set them a task for maybe some months ahead to learn how to do that themselves, and give them all finger spelling sheets. And then I explain to them how you react to deaf people, and don't shout at them unless they ask you to shout, and also speak normally to them. Because my experience of people who are deaf, people go to them and say, "And how are you today?" Which is the wrong way to do it. You speak normally, because most people can lip read you. Then I'm going to do demonstrations on what you do if you lose your sight. I have a box, and I usually have an orange and maybe a green apple, a red apple, and a pear. And I'll have some of the children to put them in the box, and then turn the box round so there's no access for them to see, put their hand in, and that's how they manage to do it. And well, obviously they realise the orange has got a rough skin, the shape of the pear, but there's always that problem between the red apple and the green apple. And I explained to them that for people like that, you really need to have the red apple maybe with a stalk, and make sure your green apples don't have a stalk. So you can do it just by thinking about it. I think the most amusing one I had was a boy, probably about 8, who had put a plum and a tomato in. Now I know with the tomato, I tell people to buy them on the vine and then cut them, leaving the stalk on, so you can always tell it's a tomato. However, he put his hand in quite the thing and brought the plum out. And I said to him, "How did you know that?" He said, "Because it looks like it looks just like my bottom," he says, which was the thing. And that was the most novel answer I had from anybody, and I couldn't think of anything to say to him. But that's the sort of thing I do with the schools.
Okay, moving swiftly on. Like it.
I really like that, Clayson. I like that story.
I remember when Martin,
So,
I remember when Martin and Anne and I were down in Bo'ness, and Anne was her first time, and she was doing a demonstration with her cane, and the class were engrossed in it, and I was sitting in the middle of the class. How do you manage to do your hair? Well, as you can see, I don't have a lot. So I just did like this. I have no problem with my hair. And she turned and says to me, silly man, I wasn't talking to you. Me put in my place.
yes.
So I do love it with the kids out there, because you never know what's going to happen with the kids. Adults can be a bit predictable. Kids are so unpredictable, and they're so eager to learn. It's a joy being there sometimes with them.
Great, thank you, John. So I was just going to ask, I mean, everybody has got very different experiences. I was going to ask Sally about something that Sally got involved in when you told us, when you were involved in the People's Story, and you told us a wee bit about your background and growing up in deaf family. Again, that is very much about, you know, raising awareness of life as a deaf person. Do you want to tell us a wee bit about that experience and how you got involved in that?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, as I was young, growing up, I went to a deaf school in Edinburgh, Donaldson's. And then, you know, as I grew up, I moved to an oral school in England, just briefly for 1 year. And I absolutely couldn't cope. I couldn't do the oral. So then I moved to mainstream school. And I had different experiences. So, you know, from deaf school to mainstream, and all were completely a different experience. But it was good because I was able to learn, you know, the different things from the deaf school and the mainstream school, and, you know, the completely different experiences from both. And so it helped me to learn to adapt, you know, sort of getting to know different people. Either I could sign if, you know, fast if they were fluent, or slower, or if there was nothing, having to write back and forward. So it was really interesting. And recently I joined a Deafblind course for deafblind awareness, and that was so interesting. I learned so much, and it made me really think about the communication with someone deafblind. Because up until that point, I've never met anyone deafblind. Well, very rarely. You know, I maybe see someone deafblind, you know, in the centre, but actual communication with them I hadn't really done. So it made, you know, because I was unsure of how to go about that. So the deafblind awareness course was really interesting. And so I fed that back to the centre. And, you know, just to let them know about that place, and they didn't know about it. So given that, passed that information on. We've got Deafblind Scotland and the RNIB, but also there's the centre, you know, so passing that information on about the centre. And also I've joined the mothers group, different ones in Edinburgh, in WP, sorry, West Park.
Windsor Park.
Oh, Windsor Park, yep, sorry, Sally's just spelling that. So yeah, lots of different groups that I've joined and been involved in, and also been involved in deaf football, and in Glasgow, been involved in various different groups, joined loads of different things. So throughout that time, I've been involved in quite a lot. And then obviously lockdown happened and I've been doing nothing. So, sorry, was that one day that you went to the centre? Oh, yesterday, just yesterday, I was able to go to the centre, and that was amazing, being able to see the deaf group there. I haven't seen them all for a very long time, so that was amazing. I really enjoyed it. It was brief, but I really enjoyed that.
Okay, thank you, Sally.
So hopefully going forward, we'll be able to do more of that.
Thanks, yes, I hope so, I hope so. But when you told us the story about you growing up in a deaf family, that was part of something called a People's Story, which both Laura and Lawson were involved in as well, and they talked about their experiences, which those things are really good for promoting awareness of sensory loss as well. And it's using lots of different formats. So, you know, we've got you guys going out to schools and going out to groups, but we've also got you involved in bigger projects, you know, that are maybe a bit more cultural and more available online. So I was just going to ask Laura actually to talk a wee bit about social media, because you're very active on social media, and you use Twitter a lot, and you know, you're always promoting what we do. So do you want to talk about that a wee bit and some of the more recent posts that you've put up, particularly about fundraising things as well?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so I'm like more of the old school generation of social media, because I only use Facebook and Twitter, but all the youngsters use millions of other newer things now. But a lot of them are not quite as accessible for people with visual impairments. Like Instagram is mainly about the photos, so that's why I don't really go on there.
Yeah.
But the Facebook and Twitter I think is really good for promoting the centre. And because of my cycling background, I've got quite a lot of followers on Twitter. So if I retweet things or do a tweet about the centre, then lots of people can see it. And because obviously I did paracycling, there is other people with disabilities and visual impairments and stuff that'll see it. And you know, it's just, if I pass it on and then they pass it on, and it's just like, you know, it grows bigger and bigger, hopefully.
Yeah.
That's what we hope for.
Exactly.
Yeah. And
so,
sorry.
I was just going to say that exactly that's another audience again, you know, and the power of social media and getting to a different audience is really important, I think, isn't it?
Yeah. And then if you get the attention of someone who's got really a lot of followers, then that's really good if they interact as well.
Yeah.
Like Gavin from Welcome and John Attenborough, they've got loads of followers.
Yeah.
So they've got loads of people with sensory impairments to then share it with.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I just think social media can have a bad name, but I think I never really see that side of it. I just use it positively, and I think it's a good tool.
Yeah, brilliant. Yes, no, I agree. Thank you very much. Brilliant. So I'm going to ask my next question, which is, Lawson, if I could maybe come to you. When you're telling people about the centre, what's the best thing about us? I mean, what would you want to promote?
Well, it would depend very much on the audience I was speaking to. If it was adults, I would highlight how going to the centre changed my life. And some of the things that I've done through the centre that I wouldn't have done had the centre not been there. And the groups that I go to, I usually tell adults about that side of it, whereas with children, I would be more inclined. I always find that children like gadgets.
Yeah.
So if I was going out to a group of children, I would take any gadgets, whether that's a talking watch or a colour checker, and I would highlight that these are things that the centre, you know, you can find out about these things through going to a centre. So it's very much pitched at what the audience is.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. So maybe I could ask Ian and Kathy to come in here. I know that recently you talked to a school group, and basically one of the things we've talked about in the course of this chat is that we want to tell people about life as a person who's deaf or who's visually impaired. What kind of questions did the children ask you two? Do you remember the conversation you had? And what would you want to tell people about life as a deaf person?
Yeah, so there were two people from Denny High School, and we were chatting to them on Zoom, just on screen, and that was arranged by Martin. So they asked us questions. So, you know, what's it like to be deaf, you know, growing up, things like that. And obviously Kathy was born deaf, but so she doesn't know what it's like to be hearing. Whereas for myself, I became deaf when I was 2 from meningitis. So I still remember what it was like to be hearing. So the children asked, what's it like, you know, to now be deaf? And I said, well, you know, growing up, you know, you use different things, different hobbies. Most of the time, you know, the communication is the problem. That's the barrier. So like, for example, my family are all hearing and they would all be chatting away and I wouldn't have any idea what's going on. It would go over my head and I would have to ask, oh, what are you talking about? Oh, I'll tell you after. And then they never did tell me after. You know, so I missed out on a lot. But I enjoyed meeting other deaf people, you know. So in school, I was in school for the deaf in Glasgow. And then I went to England. And that was fantastic, you know, being able to talk freely. And when I was in England, that was residential. So I would come home for holidays, you know, and sometimes I was really keen just to get back to school because of the communication, and that's the important thing. You know, so that's the problem, the communication with hearing people. So some deaf say, well, all hearing should learn sign. Hang on a minute though, how? You know, there's so many. So you have to be realistic, you know, and it's up to us. Just ask people, please try to communicate with us, either, you know, through slower speech or through writing. But we have to tell them, we can't just expect them to sign to us. You know, most deaf people think, oh, they need to just be able to sign to us, but I'm like, how would they be able to? You know, so we meet hearing people, you know, every day. That's everyday life. And how often do you meet someone deaf? You know, that's rare. So every day is being around hearing people. So you have to learn to cope with that. But it is hard for us as deaf people. That is a barrier.
Okay, thanks, Ian. And I think that's
and it's the same for me. You know, I was born profoundly deaf. Just through genetics, you know, through the history of the family. I've got a big family. And there's my great-great-grandfather on my father's side. Oh, it was my great-great-great-grandfather, I think. And it was his last brother that had 2 deaf children. And they researched it into the family tree and they found out, and that was great. I'm very thankful to my cousin. You know, I loved looking at the family tree and finding all that out and having a look at, you know, our name. There's over 10,000 people, you know, so loads of people. But my cousin was like, right, okay, that's enough. I think we've got up to 8 to go any deeper into the family tree and find out any more. And we're like, that's enough. But I've still got the book there, but we've cut it off there. We've found enough. But yeah, so on my father's side, we found out that it was genetic, that I'm deaf. But they didn't realize that I was deaf initially. So, you know, I would carry on playing, but my mum was very good to me. She was really good with lip reading. My father and my 3 brothers didn't. They were hearing and they didn't really bother. But my brothers, I was the baby, so they were all older. But the middle brother, he became hard of hearing. Sorry, what age was that? Not at 19. He became hard of hearing. And then so he sort of wanted then, no, I can see you, that's fine. I can see you. yeah, I can see you. It's like, oh, Ian's telling me you can't see me. Yeah, so yeah, anyway, at that point, I was like maybe 4 or 5. You know, and I would look around and see everyone kind of speaking, and I didn't know what was being said, because I was saying to them, you know, I can't speak like you. You're speaking too fast. I can't follow that. But my mother taught me. She was really good. She taught me to speak, because at that time there was no social worker or anything. You know, we're going back a long way. So it was very quiet at that point. There was nothing, you know, there was no awareness about people who were deaf. But my mum was very patient with me. And, you know, so I was a good girl always. It was very, very hard. It was a hard life. But, you know, she gave me, I was always allowed to go outside. She was very good, because it was a village. So that was fine. I was allowed to go outside and play. So I did that a lot. But then I always found that people would be speaking too fast. You know, and my mum and dad didn't realize, you know, that they would speak between themselves, and it would be so fast and I couldn't follow it. So then at the age 5, I went to Falkirk.
Yeah,
Falkirk. Yeah, to Falkirk. Dawson Park School. And that was oral. So there was only one class for 5-year-olds to 16-year-olds, only one class. So one teacher all the time, you know, and with that various age group, you know, trying to do all the English and everything. It was so difficult. And then they would put headphones on us, and we had to do that, even though I couldn't hear. And they would turn the volume up full to 10. It was so bad, you know, but I was fully deaf. So, and then that carried on. And then I moved to Glasgow when I was 10. And again, that was oral, that school. But I noticed there that children were signing, and I was like, whoa, what is that? That's the first time I'd seen it. And I was kind of taken aback. And I thought, you know, I was 10 years old. I thought, oh, maybe they were mentally ill or something. You know, I didn't know. You know, I didn't mean anything, because I didn't know anything about it. And after 3 weeks of me kind of hanging back, there was other 2 girls that were with me, and we'd kind of been watching it. And then one of the girls approached me, and she said, "This is the deaf way, is to sign." And I was like, "What? The deaf way? Okay. Oh, that's interesting." And so I, you know, took that all in from them, and very quickly I was able to absorb it. My other friend didn't. She was very oral, she didn't absorb that, but I just absolutely took it in, and I loved it. And then when I went home at the weekends, because obviously I was traveling back and forward for school, so that was 3 buses. It was a long time ago, so it was a hassle. But anyway, you know, with my mother and my father, I would stay at night. So, and then after a year, I was able to do it myself, travel back and forward.
So Kathy,
I just absolutely loved it. I loved learning the sign language. But my mother, when I was signing to her, she was like, "Whoa, what is that?" She accepted it. She totally accepted it. She didn't, you know, reject my signing at all. She was like, "Okay, that's fine." But she said, "But you and me will still speak to each other, okay?" And then my dad came home from Denny, and my mum was like, "Show your dad." So I signed to him, and my dad was like, "Whoa." But my dad wasn't happy with it. And I said to her, "But my mum told me to show you." And he told her, "No, that's it, stop. I shouldn't do it." So my mum was interested, but my dad was like, "No, that's not happening. You need to stop." But my mum said, "Look at her, she's so happy." And my dad was like, "Yeah, okay." And he backed off at that point. He was like, "Right, that's fine. Okay, you can keep doing that." So I kept going to the Glasgow school. And then there was a deaf club in Falkland. I went to a few times. Because I was traveling back and forward to Glasgow, I would only get back at like kind of 6:30. So at that time, you know, the roads were a one-way system, and, you know, so it was quite, you know, going off the beaten track to try and get there. So I didn't do that often, but I went swimming very often, twice a week at Denny High School until I was 23.
Kathy. Oh, so I was just going to say that is really interesting.
And that's how I met Ian.
I know.
Excuse me, I've got a phone call.
So I was just going to say that is really interesting, the fact that you both have, you know, different experiences, and that's kind of thing that people love to learn about, you know, how deaf people grew up and how they met each other and how they communicate, which is fantastic. And that's what we really rely on, our ambassadors doing is fantastic. So I'm just going to bring in Claire and ask, I'm going to ask Claire, you've been involved more at the board level as a trustee. So Claire, can I just ask you to focus on, when we talk about your role as an ambassador and what you do as you sit on our board as a trustee, and maybe you could talk about how you advocate for the deaf community as a trustee. You know, so what it is you raise awareness of within board meetings type of thing in terms of the deaf community.
Oh,
Difficult question.
yeah, I wasn't expecting that question, so I was ready just to explain my experiences. But yes, so the board, being involved in the board, as an attendee, I'm not a full member. I'm just there as a witness, really. But I always try to advocate for deaf awareness, because people don't understand, you know, the variation within the deaf community. So like, I'm deaf, but I'm oral. Sally, Kathy and Ian are deaf and they use full BSL. So, you know, many hearing people don't understand that. So I try to help understand that and, you know, match the needs of the deaf, because there's such a huge variation. So, you know, the needs of the deaf community, I want that to be met. So people don't realise that there's so many barriers, you know, like Sally, Kathy and Ian have all spoken about the barriers that we face. So we have to try and, you know, meet in the middle and have those discussions, so that we can get through those barriers. But some people, you know, just throw up the barriers and they go, oh yeah, no, you know, you have to speak or you can't sign, or, you know, that's the problem. So we need to remove those. We have to remove the barriers and try and find a way for us to be able to communicate. So, you know, it's difficult, and I'm working, you know, with family and friends, trying to explain, you know, what the deaf community is like, and what the culture is like, and, you know, the very many differences.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, sorry, I missed that.
Oh, sorry.
I missed that last one. Sorry, just if you just go back to that last sentence. So you said for the deaf community, with your family and your friends. Yeah, so I tried to sort of explain the different things within the deaf community, deaf culture, deaf communication, you know, how to get a deaf person's attention, you know, and what their needs are. So for example, you know, fire alarms at home for safety, different things like that. You know, I have to try and advocate for those kinds of things, because there's many things that are focused on being done the hearing way. You know, lots of things are fixed, you know, because of people are focused on the hearing way. So I have to try and advocate for the deaf.
Okay.
And how, for example, with fire alarms and things like that, interpreters, just different things like that.
Thank you very much. Yes, so that's a kind of different role again, you know, sort of advocating for deaf people and, you know, raising awareness within the environment of the board, you know. So again, it's just been a really nice example of how all of you contribute in different ways, which is fantastic. So I'm actually just going to finish off with, I was going to ask if any of you had a wee funny story that you might want to share. What's the question, you know, the most odd question you've been asked, or the funniest question you've been asked? I don't know if anybody's got one that they can think of, Laura or John.
Just often people ask me,
Yeah.
so I've got a guide dog for people who don't know, how does the dog know where to take you?
Uh-huh.
And it's like, well, the dog does not take you. You need to know where you're going. You need to know your route to the central centre or to the shop or whatever. You can't say to the dog, okay, let's go to Spain, and the dog will take you to Spain. You know what I mean? It's like the dog only knows where to go as you tell it where to go. And obviously it does get familiar with the routes that you use all the time. So the more you go, the less instructions you give the dog, but that comes over practice.
Yeah. And I'm sure you get a lot of questions about the dog, really, because I was fascinated.
Yeah, and then I hear people say about, oh, wow, that's amazing, your dog knows when to get off the bus and things, you know, and it's your bus stop, and it's like, no, you don't.
It's you that knows that, yes.
I really wish the dog didn't know it was the right bus stop, but sadly not.
Yeah. Well, Christine told me a funny story yesterday, and she said a child had asked her how she knew her husband was good looking. And apparently she said, well, he told me he was, so I just had to believe him. So I really like that. So basically, I'm just going to stop recording. Right. Oh,